Hey, what's up? I'm Eric. This is Tuesday Night Legacy, bringing you round one from May 17th. In the black sleeves, we have Max. He's playing Jeskai AggroBlade. It's basically a Delver deck, except you cut the Delvers, you cut the Lightning Bolts, and a few other things. And you slam Stoneforge Mystic, Prismatic Ending, Swords to Plowshares in there. Plays like a mid-range Delver, essentially. And in the blue sleeves on the right, we have our boy Eugene repping mono white Death and Taxes, which is an Aether Vial deck, basically trying to put a bunch of really annoying creatures into play, slow things down, and then just get in there with a bunch of 1/1s and 2/2s. It's also an Urza Saga deck and a Stoneforge Mystic deck, so you have other options to win too, but normally, especially in like an unfair matchup, for example, you're leaning on stuff like Thalia and Sanctum Prelate and stuff like that to stop your opponent from being able to do anything. That being said, we have Eugene on the play. Max has mold to 6. And yeah, let's get into game one. You have an Aether Vial on turn 1, kind of an ideal start for Death and Taxes. And Dragon's Rage Channeler on the other side of the field. Turn 2, Urza Saga. Again, into Athalia. This is looking pretty good for Eugene so far. Max just passes back, and Eugene gets in for 2 with Athalia. Passes the turn up with the Saga activation ready, as well as a Aether Vial on 2, which could represent a few things. Max is going to go ahead and Prismatic Ending the Thalia. This particular interaction is a little interesting. Thalia makes non-creature spells cost 1 more. Prismatic Ending says converge for how many colors you spend on it, so you can spend into the Thalia and declare that X equals 0. So you do, in this case, white, blue, or whatever, and Thalia ends up getting exiled. So you don't need to spend 3 to exile a Thalia with Prismatic Ending. But on the end step, Eugene will go ahead and make a Saga token, activate that vial, and he throws down a Lion Sash at a pretty annoying creature, able to eat things out of the graveyard and grow bigger if it targets permanents. Almost missed that Urza Saga Chapter 3, but Eugene will go ahead and make that second token, go into his deck and search up a 1 or a 0 drop. In this case, it's going to be Retrofitter Foundry, which will basically be a 1-card way to increase the artifact count pretty drastically. And he'll play his other land, make the Lion Sash a little bit bigger by eating a land, and get in there for 7 total. But on Max's turn, he goes ahead and plays a Brainstorm, and in response, Eugene activates that vial, puts in a Spirit of the Labyrinth. You hate to see it. Turns that Brainstorm from a hand sculpting device into 3 for 1ing yourself. Or 2 for 0ing yourself, I suppose, would be a better way to put that. Either way, we'll get into game 2 here. Alright, Max on the play. Eugene mold to 6. Let's see how it goes. Max leads off with a Darcy. Eugene immediately pops that Volcanic Island. Passes back. Max gets out another Darcy. And Eugene will go ahead and swords one of them. Start to bring the board back under control here before Delirium gets active. Max just lays out a tapped Mystic Sanctuary, looking a little light on lands. And Eugene will swords the other Darcys. The board's clean, just 2 lands versus 2 lands. But Max will go ahead and Expressive Iteration. He doesn't find a 3rd land and has to exile one of those cards permanently. Eugene will play a Rest in Peace. Not the most exciting thing, given that 3 Darcys are in exile already, but it will prevent Murktide Regent from coming out, most likely. You'd have to spend 7 mana for a 3/3 flyer, not exactly what you want to be doing. But Max ends up finding the third land, and he's going to play a Stoneforge Mystic, grabbing Umezawa's Jite, a true monster of a card in a creature-based matchup. Also pretty good against burn, and it does improve the clock in other matchups, but it's very specifically good when you're facing down other creatures, especially against the likes of Death and Taxes, where the creatures are pretty small typically, so those snipes end up being quite powerful. Eugene responds, he grabs his own Stoneforge Mystic. Gonna grab Shadow Spear, which is he may have one of the bigger equipments in hand already, or he's worried, given how many cards Max has in his hand currently, that Cauldron is not going to get there. And Lion Sash is useless, of course, because the Rest in Peace is out on the battlefield already. So in terms of being able to play a card this turn and uses mana effectively, Shadow Spear is a decent option. Max in the tank for a while here. Yeah, he's going to play a Solemnity, I think is what it's called. It's a sideboard card. If that's not what it's called, it'll be on the screen right now. It's basically a delayed Fracturing Gust, more or less. Once it's back to Max's upkeep, all artifacts and enchantments in play are going to blow up. So Eugene has to think pretty carefully here about what he wants to deploy, because if it's an artifact or an enchantment, it is going to get blasted here. He just lays out a Flicker Wisp and flickers the Stoneforge after attacking, equipped with the Shadow Spear. And he goes and grabs I believe that was a Cauldron. And then it is Max's turn, and that artifact enchantment wipe goes off, taking care of that Rest in Peace as well. Since it's a simultaneous effect, everything ends up in exile, whereas something like a Disenchant would go to the graveyard. In this case, all the artifacts and enchantments, including that sideboard card, go to the graveyard. He's going to follow it up with a End the Festivities to snipe that Flicker Wisp, and he also swords the Stoneforge Mystic so that it doesn't manage to get the Cauldron out. Eugene's turn, he's going to play that Recruiter of the Guard, go into his deck and grab a creature with 2 or less toughness and put it into his hand. He's thinking about what he wants to grab here. Many options. I think basically every card in the deck fulfills this this condition. In this case, he's going to grab a Flicker Wisp, shortcut a little bit here, and go grab the second creature, which will be Solitude. If he has a white card in his hand, he'll be able to deal with Max's Cauldron. Oh, that's right. We already know both cards. Eugene reveals both. It's a Cauldron and a Solitude. Max's turn, he goes ahead and plays the Jite, equips to the Cauldron token, and Eugene's going to move to blockers, but they seem to have realized that since Cauldron has First Strike, the counters will come on before damage goes, so he goes for a double block, and then prevents the 1 extra damage from the Stoneforge Mystic. I suppose he could have just blocked with 1 creature, but both of them would have died either way because of the Jite snipes. He goes ahead and hard casts a Solitude, exiling that Germ token on his turn, while Max had a low card count in hand, no chance of Force of Will or anything like that. Max going in the tank here, trying to decide what he wants to do. There's a few options he has. He could equip that Jite, which is looking like that's what he was thinking about doing. Because the Jite could pump the Stoneforge Mystic up high enough to beat the Solitude in combat. He just swings. Eugene blocks with the Solitude, and then he uses the Jite counter to snipe the Solitude, and then has a brief moment where he thought that he had equipped, but that was not the case. He'll main phase 2 play a Murktide Regent. Eugene will make a single guy with the Urza Saga. He elected to hardcast the Solitude last turn instead of making a guy. So he'll make one here, and he'll grab the Retrofitter Foundry, kind of a one-card way to up the artifact count and actually make that Saga token a threat. He has 3 mana left to play with. One of that's going to be an Aether Vial. A little late in the game for that to be super useful. Plenty of lands in play, so mostly just a way to increase the artifact count. Max plays a Brainstorm and Eugene jokingly goes to scoop. I can't beat that. But no, the game goes on. Max deciding what he wants to put back. He figures it out. Looks like, yeah, Expressive Iteration. Clearing out 1 or 2 of those cards. Having some difficulty deciding what he wants to grab after seeing that 3rd card. The exiled card is a Prismatic Ending. We'll see what it targets. I imagine it's going to be the Retrofitter. Yes, it is the Retrofitter. Eugene makes a servo token, maintaining the artifact count at 3. Then Max will end the festivities, killing the servo token and dealing 1 extra damage. Doesn't really change the clock, but important to keep track of the game state. Eugene doesn't like what he draws, just flooded out on lands a little bit and scoops it up. Kind of tough to deal with a Murktide Regent. He also went through a lot of Swords to Plowshares earlier in the game, so not a huge chance of drawing another one. There's not really any other card in the deck that can deal with the Murktide. So he scoops it up, and we'll move on to game 3. Eugene on the play. Both players kept full hands of 7. Let's go ahead with it. Leads off Plains Go, Tundra Go, Wasteland Rip. Controlling that graveyard early in the game, important. But Prismatic Ending will clear that out. Prismatic Ending should be in the graveyard because the Rest in Peace is exiled as part of the spell resolving, and it doesn't go into the graveyard until after the Rest in Peace has already left the battlefield, so the replacement effect does not work on it. Eugene will play Athalia and waste the white source. Gets in for 2, plays, I believe that's a Lion Sash, but Max will pay the 1 to Force of Will pitching Expressive Iteration. Eugene plays a Saga. Things are looking a little difficult here. Plenty of advantage in store. But 2 mana Swords will clear that Thalia out and open things back up. Max goes ahead and brainstorms. And plays another land. Eugene has Urza Saga activation up. He could spend some mana, or he could pass and make that token on Max's turn. Looks like he decides to elect for the latter. Max thinking about what he wants to do after he fetches out a Volcanic. Looks like it's a big Murktide Regent. Yeah, usually a pretty solid play. He'll leave a Prismatic Ending behind, not going for the full delve, and then he'll lay out that Solemnity, threatening that Urza Saga and whatever it grabs. Doesn't make a guy, and goes ahead and swords the Murktide, taking it off the battlefield. He doesn't have to grab anything, but given that it is past the first turn, he's elected to more or less put a Aether Vial into the graveyard. He does play a Spirit of the Labyrinth, but it is an enchantment creature, so it dies to the Solemnity trigger. Sanctum Prelate on 1, preventing 1-drop spells from happening on either side. 1-drop non-creature spells. But Max is just chaining 2 expressive iterations into each other, which is certainly a good thing to be doing in the face of a Sanctum Prelate on 1. One of the cards that he finds is a Mystic Sanctuary, which does come into play untapped and puts that Prismatic Ending back on top of the library. Eugene plays a Sword of Light and Shadow. White protection being quite relevant because of the removal, but black protection also being pretty relevant because all the living weapon creatures, all the living weapon equipments are black, so it gives protection from any germ token, which can be pretty nice. Max just continuing to peck in for damage with that Dragon's Rage, but it gets removed. Max hardcasts a Batterskull. He has made, I believe, every land drop this game so far, which is not super typical. I want to say this list runs something like, somewhere between 18 and 20 lands. So this is quite a strange situation to be able to hardcast a Batterskull. But Eugene flickers the Germ, getting it out of the way. And then he tries to equip the sword onto the Flicker Wisp. However, Max has a removal spell for it in response. On his end step, he picks up the Batterskull, and then on his turn, he replays it. Eugene also laid out a Shadow Spear. Picking up and replaying Batterskull is not something that you see a whole ton of in Legacy, but in this kind of a grindy creature matchup, you can certainly see it happen. Another Sanctum Prelate on 1, but Max does have another Prismatic Ending to get it out of the way. And he just gets in with the Batterskull. Eugene coming down with a Stoneforge Mystic. He grabs a Cauldron Complete and tries to protect that Stoneforge going forward by equipping it, but Max has yet another Swords to Plowshares to answer it before that happens, stranding the Cauldron into Eugene's hand. 7 mana is, normally pretty difficult. Funny enough, Max could play a hard-casted Cauldron if he so chooses, but Eugene is somewhat behind in land count comparatively. So that Cauldron is going to stay in hand for a while. Max actually has enough mana to hardcast Cauldron Complete after grabbing it with the Stoneforge Mystic. A solid 9 mana in play. But when you're chaining so many 2-for-1s, Expressive Iteration, Stoneforge Mystic, over and over again, you can make use of all these extra lands, so it's not the worst thing in the world. Eugene goes and plays Recruiter of the Guard, thinking pretty heavily here about what he wants to grab. Some options could be like Solitude to get rid of the Cauldron Germ, but that's not going to do a whole ton because, well, Max has plenty of mana in play. He could just re-equip the Cauldron onto something. Flicker Wisp doesn't slow things down very much either. But he grabs the Flicker Wisp. We'll see what he does with it. Well, nothing for now because he doesn't have the mana, but Max getting in there with everybody. Eugene evokes a Solitude, exiling an extra Flicker Wisp. Gets rid of the Cauldron Germ. Still takes a good chunk of damage from the Batterskull, as well as the Stoneforge Mystic. Eugene is in some trouble here, as Sword of Light and Shadow is one of his ways that he could get out of this, but Max plays that Solemnity. Eugene thinking pretty hard about what he wants to do here. assuming it goes off, the Batterskull will die, and the Cauldra typically wouldn't, because it itself has Indestructible. However, Eugene does have a Shadow Spear in place, so he could actually activate it and make sure that the Cauldra dies. The March of Otherworldly Lights to kill the enchantment and swings, but looks like we got a little takesies backsies here. He's untapped all his mana, undid all of his actions. The March is back in his hand, and the enchantment is back on the battlefield. He decides instead he will equip, swing, gain the life, grab a creature back. In this case, the creature that he's grabbing back is a Lion Sash. And then he passes the turn. So Solemnity goes off, and Eugene does indeed do the big brain play of activate Shadow Spear, so your Cauldra loses Indestructible, and all the enchantments and artifacts on the field are wiped away. I believe Max did pick up the Batterskull, perhaps? No. Okay. I guess he let it die and grabbed a second Batterskull from his deck? Not entirely sure. But he plays 2 Stoneforge Mystics, grabs a Batterskull, grabs an Umezawa's Jitte, plays the Jitte, equips onto the Stoneforge Mystic, swings, and then Eugene exiles Lion Sash from his hand to be able to kill that Jitte. Exile it with the March. He plays a Mother of Runes, and End the Festivities kills his creatures, and just the army of 1/2 squires getting in there and finishing the game out alongside the Batterskull. That was a heck of a game 3, I gotta say. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you to Spellhold Games for hosting us, and I'll see you next time.